Oh, so this is the Governor's EMS and Trauma Advisory Committee, Stroke Committee, and I'd like to call it to order. Let me call the roll. Cravens, Billingham, Hutchinson, Mineros. Not here. Morton, here. Motts, Porter, yep. Rescon, here. Sergio, and Smith. Here. Okay, so welcome everybody. We have a lot of stuff to do, so we're going to sort of push forward. The first on our agenda is a report and update from the Texas Council of Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke. And we met not long ago, and as you guys may remember, there are several projects going on right now. There's the RAC collection of data from the Department of State Health Services that they'll talk to us a little bit about later, and doing the hospital data collection that's ongoing. This is the Rider 97 data. Also, the council is looking at expanding remediation in the state, looking at chronic care, and there's several things that are being looked at and tried to be worked up in that vein. Specifically, speech remediation, also preliminary talks about physical therapy and occupational therapy. This is different than DAD or DARS, which is already in place, and it goes along with interesting new data where people continue to improve after 6 months or a year. So hopefully we'll have some more information about that in the future. My next report is the Lone Star Stroke Consortium, which reports to the Texas Council of Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke. They're moving forward with their money from Rider 97. This is money that's being put into a telemedicine research network. They have several programs that they're moving forward with. One is NAS Care, although I think they've changed the name, which is a methodology that emergency rooms can use to improve times, just like a pit crew improves times for a NASCAR race. And that's the update from those. More importantly is Catherine here, Catherine Winicki. Oh, perfect. So we have a report on the update of really the Rider 97 information. This is an update on the RAC stroke and STEMI database collection. So please proceed.
My name is Carla Granado, and I'm the project coordinator for the Rider 97 project. And as far as the status of the project, we've executed several contracts to allow DSHS to obtain hospital and regional data for stroke and STEMI systems of care. So the first contract is with the American College of Cardiology Foundation for NCDR Action Registry Get With the Guidelines Heart Attack data, and that contract has been executed. The second is with Duke Clinical Research Institute. They'll be creating a statewide Mission Lifeline STEMI report that covers pre-hospital data as well. And the contract with Outcome Sciences, our Quintiles company, to receive super user access to Get With the Guidelines stroke hospital data has also been executed. And we're currently coordinating with Quintiles to set up that super user account and get some training on that as well. This should be completed by August 31st. And currently we have 21 out of 22 contracts with the regional advisory councils executed. We have one last RAC who has submitted their contract, and we're working on executing that last one. We're currently conducting monthly conference calls with the regional advisory councils. Most recently, we had Catherine Bissell, a representative from the Southeast Texas Trauma RAC-Q. She led the discussion on their data collection and management system. In terms of the hospital communication, we've been reaching out to participating hospitals to inform them of the project and ask for their approval to retrieve their data through these different vendors. Cardiac packets, which included information about the NCDR Action Registry Get With The Guidelines, were sent out on Wednesday, July 23rd. We currently have 44 hospitals that have submitted their forms and are approved to participate. An additional 6 hospitals who are not currently enrolled in the database or the registry have agreed to participate, and they'll be following through with the process with the American College of Cardiology. We've received forms from hospitals across the state, primarily in the larger cities of Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth area, and San Antonio. Right now, we have some low participation in several regions, in particular the North, Northwest, Northeast, and South Texas. Packets included information for the Stroke Get With The Guidelines database. Those will be sent out to hospitals hopefully this Friday. And next steps for the projects will include continued communication and follow-up with hospitals and setting up accounts so we can begin receiving that hospital data. And once we receive and analyze the data, we'll be distributing reports to stakeholders, including participating hospitals, the RACs, the Regional Advisory Councils, GETAC, the Texas Council on Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke. And I would like to thank all the RAC partners, American Heart Association, our Texas Council on Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke, and the members of the GETAC Council for participating and supporting us in this exciting project. Thank you.
Does anyone have questions? Because I have a few questions. Mm-hmm. We've already received some information back from the RACs, is that correct? Some transport plans and such?
Yes. We've received most of the transport plans. We have a few that are coming in this week. And then stroke education programming as well, which will be analyzing and providing a summary of the different events that are being held across the state for stroke education. We also received results from a system of care survey for the cardiac system, and I can provide some updates on that as well.
Yeah, so I have a couple of requests in that regard. Could you bring some of those numbers next time, and hopefully even in graphic form? And then in regards to Dr. Cravens, if you could give him copies of the transport plans, make some copies for him, because that's one of the things his subcommittee is reviewing and wanting to make recommendations on. Okay. And I do have a quick summary of the results of that cardiac system of care survey, if you'd like to hear those. Sure.
Okay. So some of the questions that we asked were about data collection and sharing practices and the RAC personnel. So 59% of the RACs shared their cardiac data with all the hospitals, while 36% didn't share data at all. 59% of the RACs shared the cardiac data with all their EMS agencies, whereas 32% didn't share with any of the EMS agencies. And we had a little over 1/3 of the RACs captured pre-hospital cardiac data from all the EMS providers, while 41% did not collect data at all, or this data at all. More of the RACs, 77% had personnel for administrative assistance than they had for data management, which was 59% of the RACs. And in terms of their EMS agencies and staffing, 17 of the RACs had 60 or more % of the EMS agencies with at least 50% of their staff with ACLS training. And 1/3 of the EMS agencies had all of their units with 12 lead capabilities. And nearly 60% of the RACs responded that about 50% of hospitals provide STEMI patient outcomes to EMS providers. And the last component that we looked at was the cardiac system plan and quality improvement. And 68% of the RACs had a regional cardiac system plan that included at least 75% of counties within their trauma service area, while 27% of RACs had no transport plan. And 59% of the RACs had a STEMI multidisciplinary team that met quarterly to evaluate STEMI performance and make improvement recommendations, while nearly 1/3 of the RACs did not. And EMS was most frequently representative, followed by the emergency department, cath lab directors, coordinators, interventional cardiologists, and others in those STEMI multidisciplinary teams. So that's just a quick update. We'll be doing a more graphic representation and a report of this as well, and that should be ready at the first week of September.
Excellent. Questions?
Will that information be on the GETAC website?
We can probably work that out, but we'll definitely send it out to the GTAC Council and the committees.
Do we have a timeline of when the RACs can expect to receive those reports back from the state?
Yes, we are going to send that out to the RACs the same time that we send it out to the council. So it should be around that first week of September for the cardiac system of care survey. For the data points, it might be a little bit later. So probably a week or two after that.
I have one question.
Mm-hmm.
Will the breakdown show urban and rural or frontier services and hospitals? Will it go that finite?
In terms of what we're receiving from the RACs or the
Yes,
hospital data?
From the RACs.
From the RACs. We requested to have some pre-hospital STEMI data as well as some stroke hospital data and pre-hospital. So we're asking them to submit data for hospitals who aren't in Get With The guidelines. That way we don't duplicate the data. So we should get some data points from rural areas as well.
Okay, like for example, you mentioned that a third of the of all EMS services have 12 lead. Do we know, is that third the urban areas, the rural areas? Do we know who doesn't have it?
We can.
Or will we be able to tell that?
Yeah, we will, because we'll be able to match the responses to the RACs, so we'll know which RACs responded that their EMS agencies didn't have 12 lead. So
So the RACs did not report whether it was an urban or a rural EMS that we were answering about.
Mhm.
Collectively as a RAC.
So that's a big difference.
And since the initial data we don't know what hospitals have given you permission to obtain or get with the guidelines or action registry data. So should the RACs report as a whole for all of the hospitals and EMS agencies within the RAC, this initial report for all of those agencies, or regardless whether you have the data or not report any of those for those facilities?
Right now, since we asked the RACs to exclude those hospitals, it might be too late to ask them to include those. If that information is readily available, it would be okay to submit that data to us. But
Basically, what's going to happen is you are going to have rural facilities because you're not going to have contracts back for enough time to give you, let you run a statewide report.
yeah, I guess that's something that maybe we can get all of the RACs involved and see what their opinion is, if that's something that's feasible for them to request all that data.
Joanne?
One question. So do you anticipate any problems with the hospital contracts being signed, since theoretically the hospitals who have Get With The guidelines are really already submitting their data? And then also my RAC was inquiring about the hospitals who don't participate in Get With The guidelines. How is that data being collected and assimilated?
So in order to kind of fill that gap for the hospitals that aren't in Get With The guidelines, we are asking the RACs to submit data for those hospitals. We have reached out to hospitals who are not in the registries to enroll in the registry and allow us to get their data. In terms of hospital feedback, the main issue right now is that it just has to go through their corporate level approval, and so it's just a process for them. But most are interested in participating. It's just getting through all the logistics of getting the signatures and approval. So.
These are great questions. Any more? So I would point out this is a process and evolution. You know, you start out with little steps, and building data and what things are required to get everybody to submit data is a big deal. And I mean, they've spent a lot of work just bringing just the pieces we brought together so far. It's a lot of work. So thank you very much. Unless there are other questions.
We are going to be able to access that initial data.
Right, and she's going to give a copy to you.
Okay, great.
Specifically to you.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I'm now down to number 4, and this is consider approval of the American Heart Association's Get With the Guidelines Stroke Hospital Database for use in state stroke designation requirements. And that's not written very well, but the idea is to become a designated stroke hospital in the state, you have to participate in a database. And the recommendation of the council last time to be talked about and voted on this time is that we would recommend that the preference would be to use this Get With the Guidelines. But that's our preference, that's not a requirement, it's just the recommendation. Does that make sense? That Get With the Guidelines would be the recommended database that hospitals would use for designation, but it's not the only thing they could use. And so I would put that up for discussion. Does anyone have thoughts that shouldn't, I mean, some of the arguments to not use Get With the Guidelines it might cost more money, you might have something else in place, you don't want to show your data, no, can't elicit a discussion at all.
But if this is just a recommendation only, then
That's correct.
you're not actually forcing their hand either.
That's correct. That's correct.
But if the desire is to just collect the data, why specify one particular vendor database? Why not just specify that in order to be...
Todd, please.
If the desire is just to collect the data, why not just specify that the requirement is if you're going to be a designated stroke center, you have to be submitting data to a database versus a proprietary vendor who, to get reports out, you have to pay for those reports too. I mean, we want to use the data, correct? So why do we even specify a vendor, period? Let's just tighten up the fact of collecting the data.
Well, so it is, the way it is right now to be designated by the state, you are required to submit you are required to be part of a database and be submitting that. The difficulty is if you're going to then collect and correlate the data, it becomes, if you have disparate systems that have different data points and stuff like that, it becomes harder to use it on a statewide basis. I think that there are advantages to using, a similar collection data points. It makes it easier to look at things. But at the same time, I think insisting on using a specific vendor is problematic. And so that's why this is only a recommendation to use that Get With the Guidelines, because it then makes it easier for us to manipulate the data. But I think you're on point, and that's the state requirement. Just any database. It's just that if we're going to correlate the data, it's going to work better if we are all using a similar database or points from the same database. Go ahead.
Regardless of the database used, do we have finite data that is required from all of the different hospitals and systems, or is it depending on the database that they're using?
My understanding is you're required to report to a database, but you're not necessarily reporting that to the state. But Jane Jane, when you do designation of hospitals, how are you determining if they are participating in a database?
Well, the requirement for designation is not that they participate in an external database. The requirement is that they collect and review data. That can be internally within the facility. So if the facility chooses to go outside of their facility and report to a database, they can certainly do so. But as of now, the requirement is that the facility must look at data and they report to the department as the department requests it.
And the department's not requested, has not
Correct.
requested.
Both certifications, whether it's Joint Commission or D&V, though, require certain, both certifications, though, to go to the state, either Joint Commission or D&V, have certain overlapping or similar guidelines and requirements, correct?
Correct. Now they have
So to get that designation, you're going to have to submit certain data. And I think this then becomes us or the state getting that data to look at as well, so that we can coordinate the RACs.
But they're submitting the data just to the DNV or the Joint Commission at the time of recertification. It sounds like there is no mandate to actually share the data.
And
Is that
this was
correct?
the idea of establishing this.
It's just it's a recommendation.
Right.
That's what they do.
So, I mean, it's similar databases. They may not be exactly the same, but there'll have to be certain things submitted for them to even get those designations, which then to get the certification from the state, they have to be either of those two.
Well, yes, but the terminology is switched. Okay, the Joint Commission and the DNV certify the program, the disease-specific program. And within their certification requirements, they may have that you submit data to, whether it's DNV, Joint Commission, someone else. Then based off of that certification, for the comprehensive and the primary, the state does the designation. By the rules for stroke designation, we specifically say in comprehensive primary and support, it says, and submits data to the department as requested. That's the reference to data collection in our rules.
So if we said that we recommend that Get With the Guidelines be submitted to fulfill state stroke designation, that would be something that we can recommend that doesn't fall afoul of the current rule.
As a recommendation for rule change or for?
Yeah.
Clarification.
Yeah, our committee makes a recommendation to use Get With the Guidelines as the data tool. Doesn't require the hospital to do it, but it's a recommendation. It's a recommendation, or I guess it's not an endorsement, but maybe it is, but a recommendation to use that tool and submit the data, because currently that's what's going on with the Rider 97 program.
You could make that as the stroke committee, you could say it's kind of like other committees doing a white paper, and you've reviewed, like you reviewed DNV and you reviewed HVAP requirements. So it could be something similar, that you've reviewed what the database that's available through the American Heart Association, and this committee feels that it is worthwhile or not worthwhile, or can make a recommendation that this could serve the purpose of data collection for designated facilities. It wouldn't mean that it was in rule saying that the designated facility had to Get With the Guidelines and submit data to the Heart Association through that mechanism. But as the committee, you could say that, this is a database that's available that could be used.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dr. Alberts.
Hi, Mark Alberts from UT in Dallas. One of the holes in the whole system, having been involved with writing the guidelines for primary and comprehensive in the acute stroke ready, is that we never specified the fidelity of the database. We just said you have to be participating in a database. So if you wanted to tighten that up a little bit, you could recommend that if you are participating in a database, you need to collect data on stroke severity, acute care, secondary prevention, and in-hospital complications. Because as written in the BAC articles, there's nothing stopping a hospital from having a 3-point database: their name, their age, and their gender. Here's our database, good luck, we'll submit it to the state. But that doesn't have much data. So I think if the committee were to say, we recommend Get With The Guidelines, but if you're not going to use Get With The Guidelines, your other database has to have at least these points: stroke severity, demographics, acute care, secondary prevention, and outcomes. That would tighten it up a lot, and that would give folks less leeway. In other words, sort of pushing them to use Get With The Guidelines, which I think we all want them to use. It would make it much harder for them to opt out of that, because there aren't that many other databases out there that offer all of those things. It's just my perspective.
So I've modified this now, that this committee recommends use of Get With The Guidelines or equivalent data elements
Or a database with equivalent data elements.
Yeah. Get With The Guidelines database or a database with equivalent data elements to fulfill designation requirements and submit it to the DSHS for the Rider 97 program. How does that sound?
Do we have to be any more specific as far as what data points you want?
Well, that's what, I was being lazy. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, we could enumerate the data points, but that's why I put Get With The Guidelines database or database with equivalent data elements. Yeah?
Plus, I think you stated that the state can ask for, I mean, that's their prerogative to ask for that additional information, and if we're given guideline based on what we're looking for, I mean, then that gives the flexibility, and if the state says, no, you need to give us this, I mean, that leaves it at the regulatory level.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because it is non-specific. It says as requested.
So if they already have all the information there, then you don't have to ask them. If they don't, then you have the prerogative as the regulatory agency to say, no, we're not going to designate you unless you provide us with this information.
Well, in the rule, in order to be designated as a stroke support center, a level 3, it's detailed in the rule about what they have to collect. They can use an internal collection system if they want, because a lot of these smaller hospitals only see 10 stroke patients a year maybe. So, it's not financially beneficial for them to go out and spend thousands of dollars on a database. But in order to become designated, they have to show every stroke patient and every data point that is explained in the rule. And they have to monitor that and do PI and all those different things. So it is, those data points are written in the rule.
If I could just add a perspective, particularly for the level 3, the acute stroke ready hospitals, the dirty little secret is that a lot of the data elements of Get With The Guidelines would not apply to those hospitals. Because they're in-hospital processes of care, they're secondary prevention, that the acute stroke ready hospitals theoretically are not going to be admitting these patients. So a lot of those data elements are going to be moot. They're not going to apply to those hospitals. Primary and comprehensive, absolutely, those are very important, but not so much with the acute stroke ready.
That's right, because
So-
most of those patients are transferred out. They're not admitted. But
Exactly.
if some
I
of these smaller hospitals, I'm sorry, they do admit some, so in that designation survey process, if they do admit stroke patients, yes, they are held accountable for that inpatient stroke care and the data points and the outcomes.
So not to beat a dead horse, but I prefer Dr. Albert's wording, just because when you say equivalent, I don't want people to think that they're held accountable to an equivalent database for all the different levels
So
of
what was
designation.
the exact wording? I'm amenable to that.
So he left it kind of broad and talked about secondary prevention and outcomes and acute care versus, you said the equivalent of the Get With Guidelines database. And I think that's a little too
Or
high level.
similar data elements?
Appropriate,
Appropriate.
applicable.
Yeah, equivalent and applicable data elements for the patient population being
We're
treated.
talking about three different levels of care, so we have to keep it broad.
But unless you make it specific, you're going to get different data points from different hospitals. So there has to be some specificity. And whether we base it on comprehensive versus primary versus level 3, that, makes sense that they're not all going to collect the same things, but we need to specify what those data points are then.
And the point, so let me go back to the point of this. So with Rider 97, we're trying to collect data from all the stroke centers in the state to have as our database so that we can look at gaps and disparities and things where we can improve. So what's happened and was reported by Carla was, we're asking these hospitals to submit that data. So the point of this is to encourage people to do that above and beyond the Department of State Health Services just calling them up and say, hey, will you share your data? And then because it's difficult to correlate data, if you have a bunch of different elements from different databases, that can be hard too. So that's where we originally came up with recommending Get With The Guidelines, but but the idea was not to force people to use that one. So, but I'm willing, please help me write this however you guys want. So I have right now with that the committee recommends using Get With The Guidelines or equivalent and applicable data elements to fulfill the designation requirements of the state and submit to the Department of State Health Services.
For each level.
For each level
of stroke certification. So you have a comprehensive, you've got a primary, and then you've got the other. So each one, you would be matching each one.
Well, we also decided.
You've got specific requirements for each level, comprehensive or primary, plus the other one has got a different level of requirements.
You could also make it where it was just a request of the primary and comprehensive stroke centers, and to leave off the support stroke facilities. Or do you want that as well?
No, all of them should be accountable.
Yeah.
All the centers should be doing internal
If they're
performance.
going to get accreditation by the state or recognized, then they all need to be accountable at whatever appropriate level they're being recognized.
Is there enough differences that we need to work on the wording before we bring it back? Yes.
Comment?
Yes, please.
What I heard you say, I really don't like this mic. What I heard you say was that we wanted to solve the issue of getting some data elements for the state.
Correct.
It appears right now, where we're at with our data collection project, that we are receiving some data elements that is going to allow us to be able to look at the state and be able to look at some stroke and STEMI data. for what you're asking right now, whether it's get with the guidelines or another data collection process, I agree with what you've said. I think in order for us to be able to really look at how stroke systems of care happen in Texas, that we probably need to specify the data elements that we'd like to look at as a whole. And what I'd like to recommend is, since we've kind of solved the problems with the data issues right now, we're going to get that. Possibly you could ask for a data subcommittee for people that would like to look at the stroke and STEMI elements to look at it, maybe specify the data elements we'd like to look at as a state, and maybe that's something that we can come up with in about 6 months or so, or whenever the subcommittee could determine what those elements would look like.
I think that's a good point, but part of your point also, we're already collecting from many of the hospitals to get with the guidelines data elements. So if we're collecting those from the majority of the hospitals, why would we want to do a subset?
Because I think
because we already are going to have all those data elements.
We are, but there was another good point in that there are several hospitals that don't have the infrastructure or the full-time personnel to be able to obtain those data, or they're not going to be able to participate in the database. So if we find a way that we can bridge the gap, we can look at all those facilities that are using Get With the Guidelines, pick out 10 or 12 of those data elements that we could give to facilities that don't have the infrastructure to be able to log on to the Get With the Guidelines database, and then everybody could at least give us the same 10 or 12 data points across the state. It's a way for us to bridge the gap and not put a reporting burden on hospitals that obviously can't afford it.
Yeah, so there's no, this is a recommendation of a database to use. There's no requirement at all. So there's no reporting burden for people if they choose not to do this. It's just the initial, as I remember the initial recommendation for this, it was just which database to use. You're
I guess
supposed to
I'm
be
just not
using the
clear
database.
on what the purpose of it is. I think that everybody out there knows that Get With the Guidelines is a tool that they could use, and I'm just not sure. I think the purpose right now is to obtain the data. I don't know if we're at a point right now where we can say that the Get With the Guidelines data is the best data for Texas to use, because we haven't had an opportunity to be able to look at it Texas-wide. I think within a region we can look at some of those things, but I think we're too early in that process to be able to say we need to make a recommendation to say this is probably the best database. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying I don't know that we have enough data for us to be able to make that recommendation. That's just my input.
Great.
Can I add
yes, absolutely.
Christine Reeves, I'm with Hot Rack, I'm the executive director. I think that Dr. Rutledge and the committee don't realize what a recommendation from a GETAC committee does, particularly to rural EMS and hospital providers. While you sit here, in Austin, and a lot of you are from more metropolitan areas, it's just GETAC committee saying it. In the rural areas, when GETAC committee says that's the recommendation, it might as well be in rural, to be honest. So if you make that recommendation, we already are having a very slow support stroke center survey process, but it's getting stronger. And I'm afraid if you put the recommendation of Get With the Guidelines, then some of those support stroke centers who are on that bubble to go ahead and get designated won't, because they can't afford the money. So I'm just cautioning you that while you say it's only a recommendation from the stroke committee, I think that your recommendations go a lot farther. The reason the stroke system is as far along as it is because the RACs in the region started implementing when you started meeting. Just like we're doing with cardiac, it really doesn't take an official rule to make us do things. So just 2 cents.
Dr. Raleigh. Go ahead. Well, I was going to say that it obviously sounds more controversial than needs to be, and my thought is that we ought to go back and rework it and look at it, and then maybe bring it back next month. What do you guys think?
I was about to propose that. So.
Oh, okay.
so yeah, let's do that.
So does someone want to take on this project since you proposed it?
I'm glad to work with people.
Yeah.
I mean,
so can I?
Because I really am concerned about the disparity of data set, and that is concerning. If you get one versus the other, and then, you're saying similar to, well, is that 8 out of 10? Is that 4 out of 10? Where's that line? And I think we should provide them some guideline of what our recommendations are and what those data points are. So I'd be glad to work with somebody. I don't know that I'll be the perfect person, but be glad to work with him.
Can you help him, Joanne? So maybe Joanne and you can, okay, and Deb, you guys can come back with sort of a more focused recommendation that people will be more comfortable with.
We'll
Dr.
try.
Rutledge?
Yeah.
Hi, Wanda
Please.
Helgeson from El Paso. I would also ask that when you're doing this, that you would consider for those that choose an alternate database, you say that they will submit that. Jane has made it very clear to us over time that they do not have the legislative authority to create a registry for stroke and those sorts of things. So where would they send that if they choose an alternate database? Where will they send that? How will it get matched with the data from the potentially multiple databases that are created?
So let me be sure I understand your point. So right now, people are supposed to collect data, as Jane was saying. And it's our hope that people will submit that and to the Department of State Health Services for like the Rider 97 data collection. There's no
But at this point, you're not asking them to submit it to the Department of State Health Services. You are asking that they submit it to a proprietary tool. And
they are submitting it to the Department of State Health Services, and all databases all databases can be proprietary tools. It's just that Get With the Guidelines is one of them, and
Right.
it's sort of the majority use. So what you're saying is if they're not using Get With the Guidelines,
let's say they create their own.
right. So
How will they submit that?
how would they submit it? Like there are
Jane?
various methods that it can be submitted.
Well, I know technologically there are ways that it can be submitted, but what's the email address? Where does how do I send that to you? I have a whiz-bang IT guy, and he created, Strokes Are Us. How do I send that so
Well,
that my
since-
data can be included in the rest of the data?
Yeah, since there's no request right now, there is no place right now. The only request right now for data is from the Rider 97 part that the DSHS is doing in contracting. So it would be working with them through that contract.
Yeah, I think we need to walk that one out a little bit.
But this is a process. I mean, we
I
started
absolutely
out-
agree.
Right.
Absolutely agree.
We're in the beginning stages of it with the state asking the questions that they want now. I mean, it's going to be, like Dr. Rutledge said, it's an evolving process. Sorry. So anyway, we're in the very beginning stages of it, so it will develop, things will evolve. And,
But there
we
are
learn from
there
each
are
stage.
pockets in the state where they have been collecting some of this data, and it does go into a regional reservoir of data.
Right.
So the important thing is that it would be fabulous if there were disparate systems that could all be required to enter data into a single place.
Well, and right now, the state registry that they have mailed out is the only one available right now, so that's where everybody has to submit. Hopefully that will.
Everyone has to submit.
Or everybody, they want
See, that's what
everybody.
as I'm saying.
They want everybody to submit. I mean, that's the
Right.
beginning stages of it.
So thank you. I think that's a very good point. Because, we are in Texas. We're not trying to force anybody to do anything. We're just trying to collect data to help everyone the best we can. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this back into a new subcommittee with Deb, Joanna, and Warren to come up with a better language for what we're trying to do. Okay, I'll put that next time. Okay, so is there any other discussion, or we'll move on?
If they want any help with any of that, I'm happy to help.
Okay. No, you volunteered. Okay, so next up was consider approval of Brain Attack Coalition standards for stroke-ready hospitals as one of the acceptable certifications for level 3 stroke support facilities. As it stands right now, we have TTAF, which is excellent, but we have had requests from other certifying agencies like HVAP, DNV, that they would also like to do level 3 certifications, but as a state, we need to have some basis on which to say their certification is okay or not. We've used the Brain Attack Coalition to do that for primary and comprehensive stroke centers. This is just a recommendation to do the same for support stroke facilities. And so I'll open that to discussion. None? Anybody? Dr. Albert?
As co-chair of the Brain Attack Coalition, I feel obligated to at least say something. And the only perspective I would add on this is that in the Acute Stroke Ready publication, the title of it talks about acute stroke ready hospitals as part of a system of care. And subsequent to that, me and Randy Higashida also published a manuscript in the journal Stroke that talks about stroke systems of care. So I would urge the committee to consider looking at that whole system aspect of it and not look at these as isolated centers, because especially for a large state such as Texas, we have urban, suburban, and rural areas. I think that is an important perspective to look at, and especially for the level 3 hospitals, because they cannot survive on their own. They have to be part of a system of care. So I would just add that as a helpful recommendation as a perspective.
Yeah, actually, I think that's one of the things Texas does really well is systems of care, and I think that's part of. If I don't remember the exact wording in the TTAF part, but I think an association is a component of that already. Please.
Hi, I'm Brenda Putz with TTAF, and we're the agency that's currently sending out the surveyors to evaluate the program for the level 3 stroke facilities. The one thing I would ask is that someone, maybe one of you, does a gap analysis of the difference in the recommendations and the rules, because I want to ensure that the facilities who've already done the work to become designated as a level 3 stroke support are not held to higher standards. And some of the things that I have reviewed don't include the admission piece of some of the work that those stroke centers are already doing. I just request a gap analysis be done to make sure we're on the same page.
Yeah, TTAF has done an outstanding job in their certification process, and but I don't think we can ask the Brain Attack Coalition to come up to your standards necessarily. And because the Brain Attack Coalition is a national standard, I don't know that that it would be appropriate to do that. And that's the whole point of using national standards rather than otherwise. So, other comments? That was a great comment.
Just to let the committee know that the Joint Commission, working with the American Heart Association, they are actively working on a certification credentialing program for the acute stroke ready hospitals. When that will formally be launched, I don't know. My best guess is early 2015, but that is in the works. It's largely based on the Brain Attack Coalition paper that Dr. Rutledge has referred to, but it puts a little more meat on the bone about what's required for a field review, the performance measures, the standards, and the like. So fingers crossed that'll come out early in 2015.
Right, and that's not just the Joint Commission, it's multiple other certifying agencies as well. And so that's why you have to go back and have some base, the state needs some basis for which to judge the different certifying agencies that will be requesting this. So any motion to approve? Approve. Any second? And those for this? Any opposed? Okay, so what will happen now is we'll move this forward to the General Counsel, and that's how this moves through. Then, if it passes or doesn't pass, then as people come and request, this will be part of the basis that we'll review those to help the state decide if they can be certifying agencies or not. Okay, next up is consider a stroke education program work group recommendation. This is part of our discussion from last time, that 4 hours of stroke-related continuing education be required for recertifying EMS personnel. We talked about this last time. This is basically just, as you guys may remember, in the original Stroke Act, it was part of our mandate is to come up with recommendations on CME for certifying EMS personnel. We've been doing this a long time, and basically it came at last time we brought up that it needed, that our recommendation whether it was 4 hours of CME incorporated but not in addition to the current standards, and so that's what we're bringing it back to. And I think, Homer, do you want to talk about this?
Anybody have any questions, concerns, comments?
I thought we were done.
Huh?
I thought we were done.
I think everybody's good with it, and we're ready to go forward with it.
Okay, so this is really sort of a second vote on this. Those for this, since it's, and any opposed? No. Okay. And next up is number 7, is the Transport Bypass Work Group. I don't know how much Dr. Craven can do on this right now because we're just now getting that data back, but do you have any comments on the Transport Work Group?
I had some assistance back. I'm from Fort Worth, and we sort of polled some of the different EMS people around the country and checked with people that have both primary stroke centers or comprehensive. And currently there is a wide range of there's a wide range of what the EMS people do relative to primary versus comprehensive centers. And just as a preliminary, we've talked to the folks in Georgia, Illinois, Kentucky. California has 9 centers. We're waiting to hear back from them. Michigan, New Jersey, North Carolina, on and on it goes. And currently there's just a wide range of what guidelines the EMS people are following to where they take those patients. Everything from the timing of the initial incident to the closeness of the facility they're going to. And so I think, as you just said, we need to look at some more of this information. I really am curious to see on the EMS data that we got back when we talk about the percentages of those RACs that reported, which ones of those are urban, rural, and so forth, because I have a feeling some of that data is going to be pretty skewed, and I'll be real curious to see what it shows. So that's where we are.
Good, thanks. Now, we're very lucky in Texas that we do have at least a broad outline in regards to transport plans recommending transport to the highest level of center. Previously, this committee had recommended with no more than 15-minute delay, but depending on the RAC that you're in or other methodologies like a NIH stroke scale of 8, there are many different ways to do this, and I think depending on where you are, what RAC you're in, if you're urban, suburban, or rural, it's going to change, and I think that's one of the real strengths of our group and our state, and hopefully we'll have recommendations and alternatives for the RACs to help them in doing this. Next up is the Trauma Systems Committee Registry Work Group Report Update, which may be quick.
Yeah. I have yet to receive a invitation to join since I was selected or volunteered, however it worked out, to join that.
Do we have anybody here from that committee?
You're invited. We're meeting tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow at 11:30, the pop-off room.
Okay. Shocked me.
That was easy, thanks, Jenny.
I'll see that you get added to the list, I'm sorry. We've been working with the trauma registry on getting data reports. We'll be talking about those data reports tomorrow. We're looking at really at the regional level, so at the RAC level, we're looking at an EMS-specific report and then a hospital-specific report, too.
Excellent. I'm going to get to you, Kirk, in just a minute. Are there any announcements that anybody wants to make? Nope. So if not, we're very lucky to have Dr. Conrad here. He's a neurointerventional surgeon practicing in Austin, Texas. And he's my partner, so I can give you a #1 rating for him. He's going to do an update on endovascular care for strokes.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Dr. Rhodes asked me to kind of give an update on what we're doing in intervention for stroke. And, I was looking into it, and instead of going into very in-depth detail of exactly what we're doing right now, I thought it was kind of interesting to maybe give an overview of where we've been, the struggles we've gone through in the evolution of stroke intervention, and then finally end up to where we are now. I get lots of questions from ER docs and different people, hey, what about that corkscrew thing you guys used to use? Whatever happened to that? I thought that was the best thing. And hey, what about this stent on a stick? What the heck is that? So I thought it'd be interesting, excuse me, to kind of go through some of these and kind of give an overview of, like I said, where we've been and where we're going. Everyone in here, I'm sure, is a stroke expert, but just to kind of review things here, why is there a need for stroke intervention? It's the 4th leading cause of death in the country. Behind heart disease, cancer, and actually it was surprising to me because I always considered stroke the 3rd leading cause. Respiratory disease is actually caught now the third seat there, mostly from cigarette smoking. And stroke is now 4. But it's still the #1 cause of disability, and there's not too many zeros there. That's actually $70 billion a year is spent just on stroke and rehab and all the lifelong care that's taken for stroke victims. I thought this was an interesting chart here because it not only gives you the my laser is not quite working here, but in the blue is basically the deaths observed, but in the red it's preventable deaths, and I think that's very interesting. And if you look for stroke, cerebrovascular disease, again, #4 right there, you see that the CDC estimates that about 1/3 of those are preventable just with medications and diet, exercise, all the things we know about. So I thought that was kind of an interesting chart. If you can show the video, please. So I apologize, the video wasn't compatible. Just hit play right there in the middle. Should go. And so just real briefly, what is a stroke? Here's animation. 4 blood vessels leading up to the brain here. In the carotid is where you get a lot of disease. It's a very common place for plaque to form. We see a plaque forming on the side of the vessel there, platelets and blood cells adhering to that. Over time, that forms a larger plaque and thrombus. That thrombus can break off and it just flows downstream. Once it finds a vessel that it can no longer go through, it stops and basically causes a stroke there. No blood flow to that part of the brain. If you can go back to the slides, please. No blood flow to that part of the brain, and that part of the brain won't survive. So early recanalization or reestablishment of blood flow to the brain strongly correlates with improved outcome. I won't go into this in depth, but basically we have, so again, sorry for the pointer, across the x-axis there we have time in minutes, and the y-axis there is basically how well patients do. So as we march from left to right down the time scale, we can see that people do less and less well as time goes on. So again, as the saying goes, time is brain. The faster we can get people in from the community into the EMS trucks, into the ER, and get treatment, the better people will do. So in the early days, 1995, so it's been almost 20 years now, the FDA approved the use of TPA intravenously. And believe it or not, it hasn't really changed that much in 20 years. We basically get a head CT, non-contrast head CT, which you see down here, and using what we see there or what we don't see there, namely bleeding in the brain, and some other criteria, we can give this IV TPA. There's been a lot of research done with this, and it still remains the mainstay of treatment. But the time window is still pretty small. 3 hours to potentially 4.5 hours from the time of onset of the stroke to when we need to be basically finished giving this TPA. So early interventions, this is where the neurointerventionalists come into play. 1998 was a PROACT trial, which basically was the whole idea, okay, we give this TPA, we give this blood thinner through the vein, it circulates around the whole body, we give a whole bunch of it, and we hope a little bit floats up to the brain and opens up this clot. Well, why don't we bring a little catheter up into the brain and squirt it right on the clot? Sounds pretty good. So they did this PROACT trial, and it actually worked pretty well. They had good patient outcomes, they were able to open up some of the vessels, and it was deemed to be very safe. So by 2001, we started to get a little more aggressive. We thought, hey, why not just put the microcatheter up there? Why don't we stick the wire through? Why don't we try to actually touch the clot, disrupt it a little bit, and see if we can maybe poke a couple holes in the clot, get some more TPA in there. We got a little more aggressive, started to push the microcatheter through there to kind of poke at it, disrupt it some, get some little snares that try to grab onto the clot. Now, these weren't designed for stroke intervention, but they were used by the interventionalist to try to pull the clot out, and even putting a balloon up there and doing some balloon angioplasty. Well, by 2004, the company started getting involved with this and decided that this is the first mechanical thrombectomy device that came out called the Mercy Retriever. And as you can maybe see there, kind of looks like a corkscrew. So that was the first thing that came out that was affectionately known as the corkscrew. So basically, a catheter was brought up into the vessels in the neck. This little microcatheter was brought up and actually sneaked past the clot. Microcatheter was pulled back, and this corkscrew wrapped itself around the clot. This little balloon down in the neck, was inflated, and we pulled the clot back, or tried to pull the clot back with some suction through that large catheter there. It was, like I said, the first thrombectomy device cleared for human use by the FDA. It was slow. It took a while to get all these things up there to snare the clot, and it actually had a fairly low success rate. But it was the only hammer we had in our toolbox, so we used it quite a bit. But the companies kept on going. By 2009, did I skip one there? No. 2009, we had our second generation that came out. It was by a company called Penumbra. And basically, this was a suction device. So a catheter, again, went up into the brain. There's the clot right there that you can see the catheter, the yellow catheter going up to. The blue thing you see in the catheter is actually a wire that went through that microcatheter. And the blue thing, you can imagine it being kind of a ball that was attached to that wire. And that wire was reciprocated around the clot and in and out of the tube itself, and tried to macerate that clot with some suction through the microcatheter and basically break this up into smaller pieces and pull it out. The only problem was it was a little difficult to navigate. The picture down below shows some areas where the catheter would get stuck. And so it was very difficult to get the catheter up to where you wanted it to go. It took a lot of manipulation. That adds time, it was a lot of frustration. But it ended up being a little bit better tool than the corkscrew. So then the original guys, the corkscrew guys here, decided, hey, we can put little microcatheters up there. Why don't we do the same thing? So they developed this this distal access catheter, or DAC. It gave a little more stable access, and you could pull the clot more easily instead of pulling it sort of all the way from down in the neck and trying to pull it out of the head. You put this catheter up there, and there was a shorter distance to try to pull that clot in and remove it. But again, it still took a long time to do this, but it was the best thing that we had. Now we're on to the third generation. This is the stent on a stick. So basically it's a stent that went all the way up into the clot there. You can see a proximal catheter, the blue one down there. Microcatheter went up to the clot itself, and a stent was placed across that clot. The interesting thing about this is when you put the stent across the clot, it actually opened up a channel so blood could then flow. And that was basically left open for a little while to kind of let the brain breathe a little bit, if you will. And I think Dr. Rutledge actually coined it. It's kind of like letting a drowning man come up and take a few breaths before we try to inflate the balloon down there and pull that clot back out. And it worked pretty well. We were very excited about this. Down below is actually a stent from a case that I did back in 2012. And you can see that that stent is full of clot, full of thrombus that was actually pulled from the brain. And this is, it doesn't show up very well here, but this is centimeters down below. That's about 4 centimeters of clot that was pulled out of from a large stroke. So kind of this third generation, people get very creative, so they did the Solumbra, which was a combination of about everything that we've just talked about. They took a solitaire stent, kind of the stent on the stick right there, and the suction device. And so what they did with that is they had the advantage of putting the stent up there, opening up the vessel early and trying to capture that, but also having proximal suction, so if any little pieces broke off, we could then kind of suck those pieces out and take those pieces out. And that was even a little bit better, but you know, still took a little bit of time to do. There we go. And so what are we doing today? So everything kind of leads up to what we're doing now. Now we're doing what's called an ADAPT technique, which is a direct aspiration first pass technique. So this is similar to the penumbra device that we saw a few slides ago, and that is purely a suction device, but there's no more reciprocating wire. There's no stent on this. It's a new design of this catheter, much more flexible, but very strong at the same time. It can easily be brought up through the vessels and into the brain, into where the clot is, and basically you hook some suction up to this, a special machine that does this suction, and you basically adhere yourself directly to the clot and pull the clot out. And here there's a case this was a case that was done just a few weeks ago, showing clot on the end of that catheter and actually pulled out of the brain. So what is very exciting about this technique is that a couple things actually. One is when you give TPA, whether you give it systemically or give it in the brain, it can only dissolve soft clot, if you will. It can't dissolve hard clot. You get a hard thrombus that forms in the heart and goes up, or in the neck and goes up to the brain. That's calcified potentially. It's very hard. It's not going to dissolve away in just a few minutes, which is what we need. So actually going in and grabbing the clot, being able to do a suction device like this and pull the clot out directly, no medications needed, and it's very fast. That's very, very exciting. So this is just kind of an overview. I won't go through this, but all the devices that have been developed over time. And again, our timeline just starts in 2000, not too long ago. But you see how much progress has gone in that period of time. So bottom line, we have a need for speed, okay? It's been an evolution. We started out kind of a Fred Flintstone over here with just injecting some TPA. Then we go to, looks like a steam car there, putting a little micro wire in there, trying to poke at that clot a little bit and open it up. Mercy device to 2002 to 2007. Average time with that was about 2 hours. It was very painful getting this thing up there and getting it wrapped around the vessel. Took several passes. Penumbra, 2007 to 2009, we cut that down to 45 minutes or so. The stent on a stick, even faster than that, we're getting into around 36 minutes or so. With this ADAPT technique, it's very fast. Not every case we can do in about 15 minutes, but there's several cases from the time we make a little nick in the leg to get access to pulling that clot and putting it on the table. It can be as fast as 15 minutes. And so we've come a long, long way in a fairly short period of time. So here's an actual images from a case that was actually done that I did last week. So this is a gentleman, and this is the angiogram right here. This is the carotid down below that's coming up. It splits in a Y right there, basically into an anterior. Do you have another? Get a new set of batteries there. It splits into a Y there, into two vessels. The anterior cerebral artery is the one that's going straight up, and we can see filling actually both sides of the brain there. And off to our right, thank you. There we go. Our right to the patient's left, that's the middle cerebral artery, and that should be filling this entire portion of the brain right here. This patient had a very high stroke scale in the low to mid 20s. Here on the right, this is the after shot right here. That's actually the tip of the suction device. You can see right there. It's a good size, and that was able to suck that clot out and 100% restore that circulation back for this patient. And again, just to underscore this, I said it earlier, early recanalization and stroke is what is very much correlated with improved outcome and reduced mortality. So what's the future? The future is mission possible. There's lots of things that we can do, lots of things we have done in just 15 to 20 years. There's been a lot of innovation, a lot of kind of thinking outside of the box, if you will, for stroke intervention. What's in the future? It's hard to know. In fact, I searched quite a while on the internet trying to find, is anyone giving up, like what's the next thing down the pipeline, and it's hard to figure out what that is. For you Trekkies out there, some old school here with your tricorder, maybe that's next. There's been some experiments with focused ultrasound beams that are actually put on the head, focused down onto the clot to try to shake that clot and open it up. Maybe it'll be something like that. And this is kind of new generation over here, a little more sophisticated. Who knows what's going to be down the line in the future, but for sure it'll be exciting. Thank you.
Thanks. That's excellent. But don't sit down. Don't sit down. Come back. Come back. There may be questions.
Maybe questions, okay.
Yeah. So are there any questions?
I have a question. Go ahead.
Yes. Oh.
What's your time frame for doing the clot retrieve from the patient presenting?
What is the timeline? You mean just kind of walk through what happens in the ER? Absolutely. Yeah. So basically, at the hospitals here in Austin, we typically get a heads up from EMS that patients are coming in. The ER is ready for that. We have protocols that are set up. Patient gets a non-contrast head CT, like you saw in one of the first slides there, to be evaluated for TPA. Again, that's still first line. It's not an either-or situation with intervention. You can both get TPA and get an intervention. In fact, there's studies that show that that's beneficial to have both. So they're evaluated first for the TPA, and then the neurologists are typically there, and that ball has started rolling. While that ball is rolling, the patient gets another type of scan that looks at the vessels themselves, called a CTA. We can look at the vessels. I tell people basically if you can see it on the CTA, we can pull it out. We also do another type of scan at the same time called a perfusion scan that looks at how the blood is flowing through the brain and gives us information on viability of the brain. Sometimes you can get a patient within 1 hour and the brain's not viable because of lack of collateral flow and other things. You can get people that are 6, 7 hours out and have great viability in their brain. You go in and pull that clot out, they'll do well even that far out. Our team is notified early on. We get prepared. We can look at these scans anywhere. I can look at the scan on my smartphone and anywhere I am and be able to say, yes, this is a good one, let's go, and get the team ready and mobilized and be very efficient.
Part of the reason for my question, it goes back to the Brain Attack Coalition years ago to 3 to 4 hours, or back then it was 3 hours. And so it goes back to the biggest difference that's been made besides the advances in technology are the EMS people, getting these people in and getting them to the stroke center. So that's...
It absolutely starts in the community with awareness, what a stroke is, time is brain, call 911, get EMS there to recognize it. Exceedingly important, absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Is there another question?
Yes. So it sort of follows with Dr. Davies was asking. So what would you, with that adapt treatment procedure being 15 minutes, what would you...
At the fastest times. They're not all that way, but yes, they're very fast.
When the stars align, what would you consider the cutoff in terms of when you would want EMS to notify you or even consider that as an acute stroke? Because that's an ongoing...
Right. Notifying the hospital and giving them the timeline and everything's important. The patient's really going to have the assessment by neurology and neurointervention in the hospital, and we need those scans done and get a thorough history and everything from the patient also to make that assessment of who will be a good candidate and who may not be a good candidate.
So how far out do we go?
That's an excellent question, and there's a lot of debate in the physician literature over that. But I can tell you that we have done and continue to do what we call wake-up strokes. Patients fall asleep, they look fine, they wake up in the morning, and they have hemiparesis. They have a stroke. When did that stroke happen? Minutes after they fell asleep, minutes before they woke up. It's hard to know, and that's when we rely on those scans and everything. There's actually an ongoing study that is a wake-up stroke study. There's special scans that are done for patients who wake up, and there's a trial that we're part of that evaluates that. So it's hard to know. Where that cutoff is. That line is sort of blurred now. Just to make things be complete, but hopefully not make things more confusing. Most strokes happen from the carotid artery. Strokes that happen from the basilar artery or brainstem strokes, we basically don't put a time limit on those patients. Those patients tend to come in comatose, moribund, intubated in the field, not doing very well, and we don't put a timeline on those patients. We do all of those patients. Long answer for a easy question. Please. Yes.
Just a brief comment. This is all excellent, cutting-edge stuff, but I just want to emphasize to the committee and the other folks in the room, if EMS takes the patient to the wrong hospital and they dither around there for hours before they realize what's going on, that patient's fate is sealed. None of these interventions are going to be helpful, and the patient may be in a wheelchair, unable to walk or talk for the rest of their life.
Right.
So this issue of EMS and field triage and getting the right patient to the right facility with the right expertise is absolutely critical. And all of this stuff is great, but the vast majority of the U.S. population doesn't have these readily available, and we need to do a better job with field triage to get the right patient to the right facility.
Absolutely, and that's what those graphs were showing with that line going down. Just a couple hours could make the difference, like you said, between somebody eventually recovering, maybe making a full recovery, versus being in a wheelchair versus being, in an assisted living facility and adding to that $70 billion a year, not to mention the devastation to the patient and their family also. Yes? I will swing that over to the committee in front of me. That's a little bit before, before I see the patient.
Yeah, I mean, you're the head of the CAT-RAC.
So Austin does not have a severity adjusted triage protocol. Currently, all of the strokes come to one of 3 comprehensive stroke centers. Because of the geographic setup, they're just so close that they can really essentially get all the stroke patients to the highest level of care, which is our level 1 designation, within 15 minutes. So currently, we've actually looked at bypassing the PSCs, and have there been any adverse events because of that? Did any patient miss a TPA window because they drove past a PSC to get to a CSC? We looked at that data, I think, in 2012, and there was no problems. And we're going to relook at that again, but I think as of right now, that's probably the best for our region, but I can't say that that's the same for every region, and definitely not for our RAC. So just for Austin City is how it works right now.
In the back. Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. And they're not all that way, okay? Unfortunately, sometimes we will have a technical success and it'll look great and we're high-fiving each other, and unfortunately the patient doesn't do well. We've just caught the patient too late and the brain has not survived on the other side of that thrombus that we've pulled out. That's an excellent question. Luckily, it's fairly low. It's just a few percent that actually can get bleeding afterwards. That's something seen in stroke without intervention. Sometimes day 2, day 3 of a stroke, you see a lot of bleeding. Sometimes with intervention, day 2, day 3, you see some bleeding also. One thing that we're concerned about, and the reason we do all of these scans ahead of time, you say, why don't you just go in there and just pull all the clots out? I mean, it's got to be better. Well, if the brain's not viable on the other side, and we know it at the time, those are not patients to do because there's something called reperfusion injury. If you know the brain is not viable on the other side, the worst thing you can do is open up that vessel, okay? Correct, correct. That's a standard protocol when they get in the hospital, is to get that scan, get this, as part of our part of it. The initial part is just the non-contrast head CT for the IV TPA. For any consideration of intervention, we have to get a CTA to see where the clot is. Can we reach it? Is there a clot? And also that perfusion scan to look at viability. Sure.
So, do you want to ask about that? So there are questions that they want to ask about perfusion imaging, because you have available CT and MRI perfusion. We got a few minutes. Can you explain that in 2 minutes about how you use the perfusion imaging?
So you're correct. There's availability of CT perfusion and MR perfusion. There's a lot of heated debates about that, which one's better, which one's faster. I may be a little bit old school, and maybe it's the way I was brought up, but I think CTA still rules. I think the images are excellent. It's readily available in most every hospital to do that, and patients don't need to be screened like they are for MRI. The MRI data that's out there for perfusion, there's some studies that say it's very, very good. I've used MR perfusion data. It seems like it's very good. My concern with it is the screening process, adding time. Has the patient had surgery before with something implantable? Do they have a pacemaker? No, they can't have an MR. Do they have a spinal stimulator? No, they can't have an MR. cochlear implant, no, they can't have an MR. Other different, processes. So even just the screening process and then getting them in there, MR is also a lot more sensitive to movement and to motion. You move a little bit during that couple minutes it takes to do a sequence, it has to be repeated. CT's a little more forgiving, not completely, but a little more. But there's a lot of debate. There's lots of people that would counter that and say CT's horrible and MR's the best. So there's a lot of debate right now about it.
Well, thanks.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. All right, any hot topics, anything from the audience? No, Dr. Albert.
Sorry, you asked.
I did ask. Sincerely.
Sincerely. There is a major, obviously I'm sure the committee is well aware of this thing about publicly reporting of outcomes, which is a national metric. And it occurred to many people that we as a stroke community don't do a good job adjusting for stroke severity. We talk about it, but we don't systemically do it. And I just wanted to put it before the committee that any processes or efforts going forward that we try to adjust for stroke severity, because it's going to hurt comprehensive stroke centers if we take the sickest patients. What is also happening on a national level is that the Brain Attack Coalition is working with CMS to try to get ICD-10 changed or altered to have various categories that will adjust for stroke severity. In other words, fingers crossed, if this goes through, there may be different ICD-10 codes depending on if you have a mild, moderate, or severe stroke. If that gets incorporated nationally, that would solve some or all of these problems. But you never know with CMS and the federal government and the ICD folks. So I just wanted to bring that up to make people aware of it, because this issue of stroke severity has the potential to bite us somewhere that may not be good.
That's a good point, and I think Houston's been on the forefront of this.
And I think Austin's right behind them. So what's happening to us in Dallas and Fort Worth? We need to catch up.
Are there any more public comments? If not, our next meeting is November 22nd, I believe. I don't have the time. And that's the Fort Worth meeting. So everyone from Dallas and Fort Worth will be much easier. Jane, did you have any announcements or anything?
No, sir.
If not, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much.